Issues and Debates, Paper 3, Holism and Reductionism. Two sides of debate talking about how we should be viewing behaviour. Should we take a holistic approach where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, where essentially we will not look at components individually, we will look at them in conjunction with each other to get a whole picture as to what is going on with that individual. Reductionism is the opposite. This is breaking something down into its component parts to see, well, is biology more important than environment, for example? We need to look at it from each individual approach. And then we have two types of reductionism, biological and environmental. Biological, everything is due to your brain structures, your genes, your DNA, everything innate. Whereas environmental comes down to this stimulus response. We think back to Pavlov and Skinner. We can test it, we can explain it using a lab, but everything that you do is because of your environment, aspects within that environment. New keyword here, parsimony. When we take something that is really complex, we should try and look at it basically from its simplest underlying principles. So if we talk about genetics, we take that further and look at biochemistry. So basically, we should try and look at something really complex all the way down to a form of reductionism, reducing it down to what could be at its simplest core, the simplest explanation for it. So piece of AO2 here to have a go at. We've got Dave, who's 24, has been having visions of aliens. So we're thinking here this is going to be about schizophrenia. How would each of the levels of explanation, how could we talk about each of them to explain his schizophrenia? So what this is asking is we're taking it from a macro approach, which is very broad, talking about society and culture, all the way down to a more reductionist approach, looking at neurochemistry. So it's basically saying, how can we start with the outside to then move into the inside? So, for example, socially and culturally in the West, it's seen as unhealthy to be seeing things, hearing voices. So that's just how our culture depicts, what schizophrenia looks like. If we took it to a physiological level, we're talking more about, his genetics, his DNA. We're going to be looking at how he is responding physiologically in the situation, heart racing, pupils dilating, things like that. Down to neurochemical, well, it's an influx of dopamine. So we're looking at all these different levels that we could talk about to explain how his schizophrenia has manifested. So, in terms of AO3 then, the AO1 is very basic. We're talking about what holism is, how we compare it to biological environmental reductionism, parsimony, and levels of explanation. The AO3 then is saying, well, is this issue, how can we weigh them up? So an issue that we have with holism is that it's quite difficult to put into practical terms. Holistic accounts of behaviour are very hard to use because if we take something like OCD or depression and we try and look at it from a holistic approach, there's going to be lots of different factors that could be at play with somebody's mental illness. So it's difficult to take it from that approach because we don't know which is the most influential. If we took a reductionist approach for OCD, for example, we could talk about serotonin, we could talk about sort of like the basal ganglia and how certain areas of the brain are structured differently. And that may be more important than an environmental way of looking at something. So with holism, it's really hard to decide which is the most important. So it's quite tricky practically. A strength of reductionism, biological and environmental, is that they are scientific in nature. So we can test them, we can put people into labs, we can test on animals, we can operationalize, break down those concepts to make it possible to observe. And therefore it gives us credibility and provides us with that scientific rigor that we need. But they have obviously been accused of oversimplifying complex phenomena. So they're, the fact that we take something like OCD and we take it from a biological approach, people may argue that you're then ignoring other aspects that could be important. So it does make it tricky when it comes to validity, because then we can never say that one thing is causing something. There's always going to be a multifaceted approach to something quite complex like OCD. And then high level. So a problem with reductionism, some behaviours can only be understood at a higher level. So aspects of social behaviour that emerge within a group context, we can't understand them in terms of how individuals act, because we tend to just focus on the group rather than the members. So we take, the Stanford prison experiment here. It couldn't be understood by observing the participants as individuals. We had to look at that setting to really understand why they act the way they do. So it is credible that we have these are, we need that holistic approach, which is what we don't get from reductionism. Okay, so there is an argument for looking at something as not of some of its parts, but as in general, as a whole. So here we've got, just to finish, some research methods then, 2, 3 and 4 marker to have a go at. Always keep practicing those research methods as 30% of the A level.